It was a calm, warm morning in Savannah, Georgia, with not a hint of a storm cloud in the sky. The breeze played gently off my balcony as the dew drifted away and everything was sublime. I remember it was March the 5th, because I always remember that day fondly, because it's the day that my wife, now of over 30 years, consented to go on the first date with me. That's always special to me because that relationship is the longest restored relationship of my life. That serene day was broken up because this was March 5th, 2017, and I received the news that my younger brother had been murdered in Montana by his domestic partner, a woman who he had lived with. That calm day turned into a storm, and it was like a whirlwind that took my emotions from anger to grief and denial. I reflected on why I was in Savannah, Georgia in the first place. I was there to deliver a presentation on restorative practices. Restorative practices are ways of creating and maintaining community. Restorative practices are tools to be able to create fair practice, fair process, to be able to create the ability for people to have voice, the ability for us to be able to have dialogue instead of discourse. I thought about my brother, and I knew he would want me to complete my restorative mission in Savannah, Georgia. So I continued on to do that presentation. But I knew that I would have to face the aftermath of his death in Montana soon and go directly into the storm. So I needed time to think while I was in the eye of the storm. I took time to think about my words and the things I would be saying to my audiences. I took time to think about how I had to live the things that I was talking about. I wanted to make sure that I was going to have the ability to walk the talk that I was going to present to my audiences. You know, restorative practices are prestorative. Now, I know prestorative is not a real word, but you got to think very creatively when you're dealing with zero tolerance. So in being prestorative, we want to make sure that we take care of people before they're in trouble or facing trauma. We want to make sure that we are able to get people in a place through relationships that we can be there in the aftermath of trouble and trauma as well, and make sure that they're never alone in that. Now, when people walk through life, they deal with a lot of different things that are put on them by society, by institutions, by other people. And in their walk through life, those things kind of premeditate their actions at later times. And we have to understand that. So when I'm talking about being restorative, I'm talking about understanding that even when somebody has done something so horrible that it will traumatize other people, like the murder of my brother and how it traumatized our family, we have to also understand that they got there by a way that any of us could possibly get there. And like I said, I know you're probably saying, are you asking me to feel empathy for a person who's done harm to you? I'm saying, yes, that's my request, but I'm telling you that that's part of the way that we get over trouble and trauma as human beings, is being able to have that seed of empathy in everything that we do. Now, in my everyday life, I'm a school administrator, and I understand how zero tolerance affects students. So you'll hear me say things like individuals and people often, as opposed to student, as I do in most of my presentations, because what I want you to understand is that restorative practices are for all of us. Restorative practices are those key things that help us get together and get along as individuals. I want you to understand that we all deserve a restorative break in our lives. Now, one of the things I deal with students, and I'll give you an example, is that sometimes students get suspended or expelled. And what we do in many school districts is that we give them the work they need to do while they're out. So in that case right there, what we're saying about these students is this: part of your punishment for whatever you did is the absence of a teacher. And then we double down on that proposition by saying that while you don't have a teacher, you should have the ability to be able to teach yourself and be back on par with students when you return. Now that's absolutely ridiculous. You know, what we're saying is that teachers don't matter. You know, do teachers matter? Now, obviously my question right there is absolutely ludicrous. Teachers do matter. Teachers are the most important element in a classroom. And if you're telling me that a student who doesn't have that teacher available to teach them when they're being, victimized by exclusionary discipline, that they should be okay, then that doesn't even make sense. What we have to do and we have to understand is that when those students come to us and we see them as discipline problems, what you have to understand is this: when they're asked a question and they don't know the answer, they'd rather be seen as bad than as stupid. Now listen to me, those students are not stupid. They're just suffering from the holes that have been put into their education by exclusionary discipline. Now, what happens after that is we double down again and we punish them for those holes by saying they're a disruption and they're not meeting up to grade level standards and that kind of thing. So we have to understand that when we do that, we start a cycle. Now, in my role in a school district, I deal with truancy and I also deal with discipline. So I'm qualified to talk about these things I'm about to discuss. It doesn't make any sense for us to take a student and exclude them from the classroom because they're not coming to school. It doesn't make any sense for us to exclude them from the classroom because they're falling below expectations. They're not going to learn anything in an environment when they're separated from us. Now, I know there's probably some people out there saying, hey, this restorative practices stuff is probably another one of those look the other way kind of ideas that allow students to get away with this touchy-feely idea. But I want to tell you, restorative practices are accountable. But restorative practices are about expectations. And we take that very seriously with the students because that we actually want to have a dialogue with them and a relationship with them to get them to the place where they want to be and where they need to be. Now, with restorative practices, we have to understand that we need to put these things in place. To quote Stephen Covey, we have to begin with the end in mind. So we need to begin with the person and the relationship in mind to make restorative practices be a practical part of what we do. When we think about the effective questions we ask to students, we have to understand that zero tolerance might be the systemic status quo that we face in a classroom. When we talk about policies or we talk about laws that lead to exclusion from the classroom, we have to understand that we're going to be seen in a different light because that many people think that those kind of exclusionary practices are right. They believe that exclusion and that kind of discipline made them better people. Exclusionary discipline as a part of our societal DNA. And that's why we get to places where we look at things like law and order over care and respect as a principle and understand that that doesn't help anyone. We have to understand that restorative practices are there to bring us closer together and give us peace with each other so that when we get to those hard times in society, we're able to get to a place where we can get back together. Now, what I would say about exclusionary discipline is this is volatile as nuclear weapons. And I'm qualified to talk about that because I spent 20 years in the United States Air Force as a nuclear officer and understand that the kind of effects of nuclear weapons on a personal level are as life-killing to individuals, proportionally. So we might think about high yields and big flashes, but those same kind of things, when you continually hit by zero tolerance, affect you in that way. That's how you get to a place where you have somebody who would commit a heinous act in that way. Human beings are interesting, and we think that we don't need each other, but we really do. Human beings get to a place where they're so alone that if we can't bring them back from that place, we end up with the effects we see. Now this brings us back to where we began. That horrible day that happened to my family. When I gave my talk in Savannah, Georgia, I had to listen to my own words very carefully. From that, when I got to Montana, I was able to deal with the situation very restoratively. When I saw the people who came out to honor my brother and his life, I was able to understand that he had done some things that were restorative in his life as well, to have that many people come out and honor him. When I left Montana, I also brought my 2 nephews with me because my wife and family were going to be on tap to be able to take care of those young men. We go forward to a year later, the trial. Then I was asked to do a victim impact statement. With that victim impact statement, had a lot of things in there, but one of the main things that I wanted to put out there was, I asked the judge first to give my brother's killer a term long enough for her to feel accountability for what she had done. I also asked my family to forgive her. Now, that's strange for a lot of people to think about forgiveness in that context, but what you have to understand is that I wanted my family to be able to not live in that moment, forever. I asked the people, family and friends gathered in the courtroom, to not shun the family of that young lady. I know that family never set it out to raise a murderer. They set out to raise a child with all the hopes and dreams of any family. And because of substance abuse, because of jail terms, because of incarceration for murder, those things happen to that family as well. It's often said that unforgiveness is a poison that we drink hoping the other person will die, but it ultimately kills us. I didn't want that for my family, so I asked them to forgive. From that point, I understood that that was the right thing to do, and it was the right thing for my family. I also understand that if I was able to go back in time and be restorative in her life, I might still have my younger brother in my life. When March the 5th comes around every year, like it does, I still feel the joy of that first date with my wife. But I also have a private conversation with my brother. I know that he's proud of what his sons are doing. I know that he's proud that his sons are growing socially, emotionally, and physically without being constrained by unforgiveness. I know that he'd rather be here himself raising his kids, but I know that absent him and them doing well is something that gives him joy. So what I want to say to all of you, the eye of the storm may be calm, but you can't live there, because eventually the storm will come in and challenge you to the fight of your life. And if you prepared yourself restoratively, kind of like people waiting for a hurricane to hit, putting boards on the window and making sure they're ready for that storm, then you're going to be ready to be able to deal with that storm and come out of it with forgiveness and grace. That way, you don't allow something as horrible as the thing that happened to my family with my brother's death to turn you into different people you're not, to make you cold and pushing other people away. I appreciate being here today, and thank you.